meeting today. Hi everybody online. It has been a bit of a whirlwind this week. So we are going to be talking about Trump's war on Iran and the global economic meltdown. Markets have been crashing and whatnot. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave this up to Rob, and he'll be talking about what's been going on. So Rob will be talking for about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll have some questions after. And then it'll be Rob that'll give us a little bit of a briefing and answering the questions.
You hope.
Right, all to you.
Okay. Right, well, thanks very much, Savannah. At this point, I normally thank the meeting for inviting me to speak, but as you didn't invite me to speak, I can't do that. I have to say that everybody I asked to do this, I don't know whether it was me or the topic or a combination of the two, but it obviously scared them off and they didn't want to do it. So you are lumbered with me, so I apologise for that. Now, with the announcement of the 2-week ceasefire, an hour and a half before Trump was going to obliterate Iran, it wasn't only the people of Iran who breathed a sigh of relief. They've been under merciless bombardment from the Israelis and the United States for over 5 weeks, but actually rich investors did too. The stock market bounced within a matter of hours. The price of oil fell below, the benchmark price of oil fell below $100, and interest rates eased. And this isn't surprising really, because had Trump carried out his threat to obliterate Iran, Iranian oil production would obviously have been halted. The Iranians' response, though, to the merciless attack on Iran would have been, I think, to have attacked the oil and gas refineries that they haven't yet attacked across the Gulf states, with a high chance of destroying quite a lot of that capacity. They probably would have gone for the 750-mile pipeline that takes oil from the east of Saudi Arabia to the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea, which is currently taking 5 million barrels a day out of the Saudi oil fields. The Strait of Hormuz may have been mined and otherwise rendered impassable, and the Houthis over on the Red Sea in Yemen might have shut the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, through which a lot of oil also flows, including that 5 million barrels currently coming out of Saudi Arabia. In other words, Trump's threat to bring hell to Iran, more than he had already done, would have had untold consequences for the world economy, with the oil price heading for $200 or maybe even more than that. I mention all of that because that's not actually off the agenda yet. The ceasefire is very fragile. They always say Trump chickens out. He did chicken out this time, and it is a defeat for Trump that he did. But one day he might not chicken out, and then we will have something like the consequences I've just described. So it's all still there threatening us. But even so, the impact of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz for more than 5 weeks has created big problems for the world economy. And as I say, the ceasefire looks very fragile with completely different understandings, actually, of what it is they've agreed to negotiate on the basis of. Trump said they're negotiating on the 10 points, which was the plan that the Iranians had put forward. Then he said it's the 15 points, which is the plan that the Americans had put forward. And there isn't any common ground between either of the plans. So where all of this is going, who knows? And of course, the slaughter in Lebanon continues, courtesy of Benjamin Netanyahu, although he's talked about talking to the Lebanese today. Now, the large rise in the price of oil has attracted the headlines since the war on Iran began. About 25% of seaborne oil normally comes through the Strait of Hormuz, and this is estimated to be in the region of around about 15 million barrels. Estimates vary on all of these things, but it's about 15 million barrels a day, or twice as much as is used by the 5 largest European economies all put together in a day. And that's a massive loss of supply. In fact, the price of oil might have been much higher, but for a number of factors. There's been an agreement to release up to 400 million barrels from the strategic reserves held by the United States and elsewhere. Saudi, as I mentioned, has expanded supply through the Yanbu pipeline from 1 to 7 million barrels, 5 million of which are going onto the open market. Sanctions were lifted on Russian oil, although Starmer doesn't appear to have heard that because he stopped oil tankers in the channel the other day. And also, amazingly, on Iranian oil, even though the United States and Israel is at war with Iran. And of course, there's already a float outside the Strait of Hormuz that hadn't reached its destination. So for all those reasons, the price of oil hasn't gone even higher. Now, as I say, the oil price did fall after Trump's announcement, but it's still 50% higher than its pre-war price, roughly speaking. So it's still way up beyond where it was. And of course, much more than oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of seaborne liquefied natural gas comes, and that hasn't been offset at all by reserves or anything else. And much helium, sulfur, urea and aluminium, to name a few vital products, also stopped by the closure of the strait. Helium is vital in semiconductor and other high-tech production because you can take it down to very cold temperatures and it doesn't combine with other stuff. Urea is vital for fertilizer production, which in turn has been vital for keeping up food supplies across the world. And aluminium is vital in plastics and much else. And there's much else that isn't coming through either. So significantly reducing the supply of these oil and all the other vital materials in world economic production is naturally pushing world prices across the board on all of those items up, but also all the prices of the things that depend on those items. So there's a kind of inflationary surge beginning to emerge within the world economy. But it's also slowing the world economy down because there aren't enough of these vital materials being produced and delivered to continue production at the same pace as before. It's just a logical thing. If you cut supply of these things, then production generally is dependent on them, then production generally is going to shrink, has to shrink, because there's no alternative, as well as prices going up. In other words, the world is facing both inflation and stagnation, or as it's become known, stagflation, a term that was coined back in the 1970s, many will remember, at the time of the last two big oil crises, in 73 around the Yom Kippur War, and then in 79 as a result of the Iranian Revolution. Stagflation. In those days, I think inflation went up in Britain to something like 25% at its peak, or even 27%. I remember being at college, we all had to go on strike because they put up our rent 17%. We got a deal. It wasn't a very good deal because our grants had only gone up 12%. We kind of compromised at 15%. Right, it's not a rent, but you know how these things are. But this is the kind of thing it produced. And economies slumped. They were stagnant, no growth, and all the rest of it. Now, as things stand at the moment, for poorer and more vulnerable economies that don't have financial reserves, don't have oil and gas reserves, and so forth, the effects have already been much worse. For example, Bangladesh is on the verge of running out of fuel. The lights are going to go out very soon. They're having to ration very, very strictly. And these poorer economies, Philippines and other economies like them, are now facing contracting economies, but with rising prices. And as I say, the real possibility of running out of the fuel to keep the lights on. It's a very frightening prospect for them. Indeed. But even if the Strait of Hormuz was opened today, and according to Trump, it's supposed to be open today. In fact, the Iranians have now said that they're only going to allow 15 vessels through per day. That's their reading of the deal, and that's a fraction of the pre-war number that were coming through the strait every day. So it's still going to be very restricted. But even if it returned to its pre-war norms of 100 vessels or more, it's going to take a long time to unwind the damage that's already been done. So the problems for the world economy are not going away anytime soon. And really there's two reasons for this. Firstly, as I say, it'll take time to restore oil and gas production, for example, to previous levels. Facilities have been damaged. The Ras Laffan gas facility in Qatar was damaged by drone attack, lost 17% of its capacity. And according to the Qataris, it's going to take years to restore that capacity and billions of dollars of expenditure. It'll also take time to restore production from wells and refineries that have been closed because the storage facilities are full. Because they haven't been able to transport the oil, they can't keep taking it out of the ground if they haven't got anywhere to store it. And those storage facilities are now full. So they've had to close down the wells and close down the refineries. It takes a long time to put them back into production. You have to take it very slowly, otherwise you damage the wells. And the same applies actually to the gas refinery. You have to, because of the very low temperatures, you have to bring the gas too. You have to be very careful about the way you bring the pipes back onto production. It takes months really to get there. So you're not going to get back to the production we had before for a very considerable time. Tankers are also in the wrong place because they've been shut out of Hormuz for 5 and more weeks. And insurers, and insurance is very important, if you have a tanker full of oil worth millions of dollars, you want it insured just in case it runs into the rocks and, sinks or gets hit by an Iranian drone. And of course, you have been able to get insurance apparently for tankers, which haven't been going through the Strait. But it's so high, no one's prepared to take the insurance on. So you have to reassure the insurers that they're not going to be caught out. In other words, they need a long-term peace settlement in order to insure those vessels again. Now, so there we have it. A big cut in the supply of absolutely vital materials for the world. It means much higher prices. It means much slower growth, and for some countries, a contracting economy. And that's on the optimistic scenario that we are now looking at peace. But we also have to look at this in the context of an increasingly fragile world economy, which was there even before the Iran war. The last 40 years of neoliberalism, so we were sold neoliberalism back in the 1980s on the basis that if we roll back the state in some way and we bring in the market and we internationalise finance and money can go anywhere in the world to chase profits, we'll all be much better off. That was the idea. The world will be liberated from all this kind of cloying state control, social democracy, redistribution, welfare state nonsense. That was the answer of neoliberalism. But neoliberalism hasn't provided this capitalist nirvana. The history of the last 40 years is of slow and no growth, which has been punctuated by very serious financial crises, the most important of which was the great financial crisis of 2008-9, which almost brought the whole international financial system crashing down with devastating consequences. And on top of, and then of course the 2008-9 crisis was followed by years of austerity, eroding our national health service, our welfare state and so forth in this country. And meanwhile, the rich, of course, have been getting much richer at our expense. The gap between rich and poor has exploded during these years of neoliberalism, and ironically, during the years of austerity. So we've all been suffering austerity, but they've been getting really, really rich. And there's an irony here, by the way, which is that in the United States, where wages have been stagnant for the vast majority for a long time, and it's the kind of created the disillusionment which allowed Trump to try and capitalise on this with his populist nonsense. Insofar as consumption spending is growing, it's growing in the top 10%, and it's growing in the top 10% because they've got much wealthier. That's the way in which the cookie crumbles under neoliberalism. Now, the aftermath of the great financial crisis in 2008-9 was that the big financial bodies, the central banks and what have you, all got together and say, what can we do to stop us having another crisis like that? Their answer wasn't abolish capitalism, strangely, but it was that they should impose on banks the requirement that they should have higher capital requirements. Now that's a technical term for they should have more in the bank, as it were, saved up against the rainy day of really big loans going bad. But these higher capital requirements on the banks mean they can't lend as much and they can't lend as riskily as they did before. That was the purpose, actually. So the financial markets being what they are, in other words, these whiz kids, who make tons of money in the City of London and elsewhere, is to find ways around this. And the way they've found around this is called private credit, which has exploded over the last few years. It's now worth $3 trillion a year. And only today, the governor of the Bank of England has warned that he thinks that there is a serious problem emerging in private credit, which could be as bad as the 2008-9 crisis. There's already what looks like, in terms of the way these things are organised, a bank run on the big private financial institutions like Blackstone and Ares and Blue Owl and some of the others. In other words, investors are trying to get their money out because they don't think the banks, they're not banks, these private credit institutions are sound anymore. They think their loans have gone bad. So that's one sign of the fragility, of the emerging fragility, and it's been covered up because the thing about private credit is it's not transparent. They make loans to companies, and they get big rewards for these loans, but the companies themselves and the loans that they've made are not transparent to the market in general. So it's very difficult to price them, which benefits them for a period until things start going bad, as they seem to be doing. And one of the reasons they're going bad is ironically because of artificial intelligence. Not the artificial intelligence itself, but rather the effect that the growth of artificial intelligence is having on those high-tech companies to which private credit has been lending its money. These companies do programming, this kind of fancy stuff in Silicon Valley. It's way beyond me. But they've made lots of money for the private credit market. But they're not AI themselves. And what has shaken the market is that artificial intelligence now looks as though it's going to be able to do the programming that was being done by these companies before, with clever programmers doing programming, and that's devaluing these companies so that the loans to them are no longer worth what they were. So it's a kind of an effect of AI on this bit of the market, which is shaking it. But AI itself is, of course, itself a bubble. Vast amounts of money is being poured into creating these enormous data centres, which are now, by the way, running into resistance in the United States because of the effect they're having on energy prices and the environment, because they absorb vast amounts of water and electricity in trying to generate the AI stuff that they're doing. Literally trillions of dollars are being ploughed in here. And they're being ploughed in because the big companies involved in this are worried about other companies getting ahead of them in the game. So they're all having to pour in as much as they possibly can to be the winners in this race to get the smartest AI you possibly can get. And all of this is on the premise that the huge rise in productivity, how much can be produced with a workforce, smaller workforce or whatever, these huge rises in productivity will themselves liberate particularly the American economy. There'll be all this much greater productivity, and with the much greater productivity, there'll be huge profits, particularly for the AI companies. That's the thinking. Which gave rise, of course, to a very clever chap called Rishi Sharma, who's the head of international finance at Rothschild's International Bank, saying that US capitalism, and indeed capitalism more generally, is one big bet on artificial intelligence delivering this much greater productivity and these much higher profits in the future. That's the only thing that can justify the amount of money that's being poured in at the moment. And it's the only source of growth at the moment in the US economy. The rest is flat. The US economy is only growing because of AI investment. Well, okay, but there are a few problems with this rosy scenario for American capitalism. The first is there's absolutely no guarantee that AI will provide the productivity gains that they claim. It's just an idea. Oh, yeah, if we've got this really clever AI, we'll be much more productive. No guarantees that this is true at all. And of course, because so much money is being thrown in, there's no protection against there being what you might call overproduction of AI. Too much AI that you then have to sell at a lower price and you can't make the profits you needed to make for all of the investment that you've made. Okay, that's straightforward. But there's another thing, which we as Marxists are very aware of. And that is, of course, that it's the employment of workers and their exploitation by paying them less than the value of what they produce, which is the source of profit in the system. If you introduce AI with all this magic extra productivity, but far fewer workers, you're going to have fewer workers from whom the profits are derived. So profits are going to be driven down. And the other side of that, of course, is that if AI displaces workers, you're going to have far fewer workers with money in their pockets to buy the goods that come out at the end of the process. So you've got a double whammy from this. So I think it's all pretty rocky, this stuff about how AI is going to help more. So that's the economy as it was before we had the Iran war, and now you have the Iran war producing all these very serious stresses coming on top of it. So, as I say, things were looking pretty shaky. Yes, right, I'll go really quickly, just the last bit. So things were looking pretty shaky before the Iran war, now it's even shakier. But states are not powerless to intervene when things go badly wrong. In the past, states have increased their spending and cut taxes to boost economies. More recently, central banks have assumed that management role of economies by cutting interest rates, printing money, pumping the money into stimulate growth. But there are now huge problems in either of those things happening. Many governments are now loaded down with debt. In Japan, the national debt is well over 200% of the total value of production in a year, annual gross domestic product. In France, it's 120%. In the UK, it's 100%. In the United States, it's over 100%. The debt burden in the US is the most significant because with tax cuts, slow growth and a huge increase in arms spending that's coming, the trajectory is for it to keep increasing quite rapidly as a percentage of the economy as a whole. And this is made worse by rising interest rates in the wake of the Iran war as investors fear inflation. As for central banks, they face a fundamental dilemma. They may want to cut interest rates in the face of a slowing or even declining economy, but raise interest rates to keep a cap on inflation. So they have to lower them and raise them. That's a contradiction. And pursuing either side of the contradiction will not guarantee success. Cutting interest rates if investors have lost confidence is not going to, because they think there aren't going to be the profits for them, is not going to bring investment back in. As Keynes said, it would be like pushing on a string, and raising interest rates against inflation caused by loss of supply as opposed to too much demand is not going to work either. So we have rocky times ahead economically. Last time round in the 1970s, stagflation produced an upsurge in workers' struggles to try to maintain the standard of living, preserve their jobs in the face of inflation. In the end, in the 1970s, the way was opened for Thatcher and neoliberalism when the Labour government used its relationship with the trades union leaders to agree wage restraint, to have people cut their wages to have their living standards fall in the national interest. Now, trade union organisation may be weaker now, but so is the hold of Labour over the workers' movement. Just have a look at the percentage of support for Starmer in the opinion polls. All this says we have to get better and better organised for the struggles that lie ahead, and we, as a party, urgently need to grow to be influential within those struggles.